welcome to Hardtalk India. 7 years ago, my guest wasn't even in politics. His world consisted of Jackie Kennedy and Gayatri Devi of Jaipur. Last month, however, he won his second election as Chief Minister of Orissa, and now he's arguably perhaps the most successful politician in the National Democratic Alliance. How did he do it? And much more importantly, how does he face up to the challenge of governing India's poorest state? Those are the two core issues that I should raise today with the Chief Minister of Orissa, Naveen Patnaik. Chief Minister, as I said, you've just been re-elected to a second term in office, and along with your ally, the Bharatiya Janata Party, you almost have a two-thirds majority in the Orissa Assembly. When you called an early election, were you confident of this result?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I've seen the response of the people of the state since I've been in the world of politics and since the last assembly election. I knew that we would do well in this election as well.
But it's conventional in India for governing parties to actually lose votes because of what they call the incumbency factor. You've managed to avoid it altogether.
Orissa, as you well know, has a very large population below the poverty line. So when I entered politics, which was about 7 years ago, I really stuck to the basics, which was to the pro-poor programs. And in the last 4.5 years, since I've been Chief Minister, I've stuck to those basics to improve the lot of the very poor, of whom there's virtually half the population of the state is below the poverty line, virtually half the population.
So you're saying
47%.
that your pro-poor policies led to your winning a second term?
I would say yes, very largely.
So if I were to ask you, what did you do right, which neighboring chief ministers in Andhra like Chandrababu Naidu, or slightly further afield in Karnataka like S.M. Krishna did wrong, is it your policies that made the difference?
Well, I really wouldn't like to comment on Andhra and on Karnataka at the moment. I can speak about Orissa. We've done a great deal for the farmers, water users associations, which we call Pani Panchayat. Also, where you have drought-like situations, we have a watershed mission. Then as far as women are concerned, we have women's self-help groups, which is called Mission Shakti. We have, in the last 4 years, more than 100,000 such groups. And that's improved the economic and the social lot of women.
But I would imagine, Chief Minister, that any Chief Minister in Orissa has had to follow similar policies for the very reasons that 47% of the state is below the poverty line. But you've achieved a family record. Your father never won 2 consecutive elections. You have. How do you explain the difference?
As I said, one has really seriously stuck to the pro-poor programs. Also, as far as the road networks are concerned, as far as agriculture is concerned, irrigation, it's mainly a rural state with a very large tribal population. I mean, a great deal of this geographical area of the state comes in scheduled areas. So really, and for the tribals, for others who are very poor, a lot of very good programs have been initiated and are doing well.
Reading between the lines of what you're saying, you're suggesting that your policies actually reached out to the problems that exist in a way in which previous chief ministers, perhaps including even your father, didn't quite succeed in touching the problem.
I think my father did extraordinary things for the state, both in the large scale and in the small scale. He did extraordinary things. That's why his immense popularity, which is, of course, a great blessing for me with the people of Orissa.
How much of your success is attributable to your father's memory? How much to what the press calls your own clean image? And how much of it is because the opposition lacked credibility and actually fell apart?
My father's umbrella will always be there. That's the main reason that the people of the state have showered their blessings on me continuously, and I'm extremely grateful to them for that. Also, you talk about clean image. I felt from the very start that a crime like corruption, is a terrible stumbling block for progress and development. So we have tried to do something strongly about that.
In other words, corruption was an issue that you were determined to tackle from the word go.
Well, corruption has to be tackled, and you have to have very efficient development, and your welfare schemes for very poor people has to be well done. And we are on the right path. That's why we have these results.
Listening to you, I get the feeling that you were a chief minister in your first term in office who identified the core problems in his state and identified the obstacle of corruption as one that actually prevented good policies and tackled them. And yet if one looks at your background, until the last 7 years, you weren't a politician. 4 years ago, before you became chief minister, Orissa wasn't even really home. And you still don't speak fluent Odia. Why weren't these disadvantages that made you unelectable?
I think people do recognize when someone is being serious and honest and wants to tackle their problems and is going on the right path. Naturally, I'm not here to flatter myself, but I hope, since that's my dream, to do something for the poor of the state. And indeed, perhaps they think I will. We are on the right track.
Your essential honesty, in a sense, you're saying, was recognized and became your greatest advantage.
Well, you do need honesty in today's public life, don't you? And everyone should endeavor for that in our very poor country, and certainly in my very poor state.
But you're saying that in your case, it became your greatest advantage. And in a sense, your inexperience and your newness became a reason for believing in you. That's what you're suggesting.
No, I'm not suggesting that. I think when I entered politics, it was at quite a mature age, and when I was 50 years old. And so one takes a much more serious view at that age of serious problems. I mean, one doesn't go in for fantasies and unrealistic dreams. One goes to tackle problems seriously. It is a mature age.
Okay, I've spent time up till now trying to understand what people in India consider the novelty of Naveen Patnaik as a successful chief minister, because looking at your background, they just can't believe you made the transition. Do you accept that your very success has given rise to enormous expectations, and do those frighten you?
The expectations will always be there, and one must always try and fulfill them as much as one
But
can.
do they frighten you?
Well, naturally, you are concerned. You will be constantly concerned every hour of the day for the needs of the people, and you have to work towards that.
Yes,
It's
but
not a question of being frightened. You have to try and achieve as much as you can.
you see it as a challenge that you dedicate yourself to.
Absolutely.
But Orissa faces huge problems. As you said a moment ago, 47% of the population live below the poverty line. I can add that 77% of the population don't live in proper homes, and 97% of the population don't have access to proper sanitation. These are daunting challenges. Are you the man for them?
If you remember that terrible calamity before my government came, in 1999, the super cyclone. After that, my government has completed virtually 7 lakh Indira Awas Yojana houses. That's virtually 700,000 houses.
How does that compare to
For the
what
poor
previous
people.
governments have done before you came to
Well,
power?
much less. Naturally, with a calamity like the super cyclone, the center gave us much larger grants for building these houses for the very poor. That was successful. Village roads have been done well. Schools have been made. Cyclone shelters, hospitals, all that has.
Are you saying
people
that today
people have
Orissa-
seen that.
Are you saying that
in
today
the-
Orissa is a different state?
I'm saying it's much improved, because there's a great deal more of care that's been. They know that the care is there and the work is there.
13 chief ministers before you tried and failed. What are the talents and skills that you have that make you different?
I think we just have to approach the problem very pragmatically and very clearly and get on with the job.
So it's your pragmatism and your clarity of vision.
Well, we all try. And also I'd like to speak here about calamities. Odisha is a calamity-prone state. We were talking about the super cyclone. In the last 4 years, while my government has been there, we've had two very serious floods and one drought. And these two serious floods in 2001 and 2003 were tackled, the relief was tackled very well. It was all the help reached the people in their marooned areas, in their waterlogged areas, in their flooded areas.
To decode you, what you are saying is I've been re-elected because I've been a very good chief minister.
Well, here I'm talking about calamities. It did reach the people fast, and one can say quite clearly now that Odisha, for the first time, with the last two floods in the last 4 years, can tackle its own relief.
But then explain this to me, Chief Minister, because the statistics of your first term in office suggest that far from things improving, they've deteriorated. Growth has halved, and in some years it's actually gone down to negative. Debt has increased to 61% of your state GDP and is rising at 3,000 crore a year. And the fiscal deficit last year was almost 12%.
These, I mean, over virtually the last decade and a half, these debts have been mounting. It has had a spiraling effect, and we have certainly approached the central government, to help us in this. Many states have financial problems, and now it's really up to the center to help us in this.
Except for the fact that your debt is 61% of your GDP, and it's gone up by almost 10 to 11% since you took over.
Because the financial debts that we were left in the red to a great extent. That's why, while I've been in office, I've been constantly demanding from the center special category status for Odisha.
I want to come to that in a big way. But your critics say that the management of the state economy under Chief Minister Naveen Patnaik has not just been bad, it's been misgovernance.
That I find completely, that statement is completely incorrect. Many states, as you well know, I'm sure you've interviewed several chief ministers, that this kind of financial problems are there in many states, including in the center, with the central government.
Let's take up an example of what your critics say is misgovernance. They say in 2000, the Indian Oil Corporation started work on an oil refinery in Paradip port. That's exactly the sort of investment you want and you need. But instead of helping matters, as soon as the work began, you withdrew the very tax concessions that made it possible.
All the tax concessions have all been rectified.
Because the work stopped?
No, because they have been rectified, and we have approached the central government several times to start work in a very serious way, including the present government.
Except that, can I point out that for the 3 years that the work had stopped, not only did you lose 3 years of time, but the cost of the project has escalated by almost 3,000 crore. You can neither in Orissa afford the delay nor the incremental cost.
Well, there were certain financial problems. Now we've overcome them. All the concessions have been offered to the central government, and we anticipate the work to begin again very soon.
But the point I'm making is that these were unnecessary delays and unnecessary costs, and they were incurred because the government in Orissa didn't know what it wanted.
There are certain problems that are there, but we've overcome them, and we've approached the central government several times. The ball is very much in their court to get on with the Paradip oil refinery.
But do you accept that you mishandled this?
No, it wasn't mishandled. There are certain hurdles that were crossed, and for the last few years, again, we've been approaching the central government, including the present one, the work get on. They get on with the work in the Paradip oil refinery.
Critics say that he cut his own nose to spite his face, and now he has to undo what he did wrong.
Critics will always be there in democracy, as they should be, but I'm giving you our point of view.
Okay, let's take up a second example, the one you referred to a moment ago, your failure to get special category status for Orissa. The facts are entirely on your side. You have the highest infant mortality in the country, perhaps the lowest standard of living, very arguably the worst infrastructure. And yet, despite all your efforts, the BJP government at the center refused to give you special category status. Why did you
I think
fail?
we're certainly deserving of special category status, and that has been my demand for a long time. It's also been the demand of earlier governments. We will certainly continue in this very strong demand for special category status.
But you were a member of the NDA. Once upon a time, you were a member of Mr. Vajpayee's cabinet. He was your ally, and he didn't grant it.
Well, we will continue to try with all governments, and as I just mentioned to you, earlier governments, which have also had governments in the center, state governments which have had their own governments in the center, have tried the same and failed. We will continue, and we certainly hope to succeed.
Are you suggesting that governments at the centre knowingly or perhaps unwittingly discriminate against Orissa?
I'm not suggesting anything of the kind, but we have to make our positive demands, and central governments will have to respond to the positive demands of a very poor state.
Do you know why your allies say that this is another sign of Naveen Patnaik's failure? Because they say the very same government gave sackfuls, bagfuls of central assistance to Chandrababu Naidu, although his need in Andhra was considerably less than yours in Orissa. Your need is greater, but in comparative terms you were ignored.
No, because of course we have enormous needs in a very poor state like mine. But during the post the super cyclone, the central government did give considerable help to us. Also in the KBK areas, those are the very backward districts.
When 90% of your population is below the poverty line.
And we have achieved, in fact, from the central government, even more than special category status.
But come
Instead of
only in that limited
if you'd
area.
allow me to finish, special category states are 90% grant and 10% loan. In the 8 KBK districts, we've got 100% grants in the last 3 or 4 years,
But in the
and much larger sums, much larger funds than any earlier government.
But for your main demand of special category status for the whole of Orissa, you were ignored by your allies. And the charge is that he was too inexperienced to know how to do it.
I repeat again, there have been earlier state governments with their governments in power in the center which have made this demand and failed.
In which case,
We
you all
will
know better than any of your predecessors then.
Well, as I told you, 8 districts, the KBK districts, have got more grants. 100%
But Chief
grants.
Minister, can I just point out, either you're a new person who knows how to work the system and you should have therefore succeeded, or you're no better than your predecessors, and that's why just like them you failed.
Well, if you'd allow me to finish, Orissa has 30 districts. 8 of them, which are the KBK districts, now get more than special category status. They get 100% grants, and that happened in my
So you're
time.
saying everything you want has been done?
Not at all. We hope much more for the remaining 22 districts, and I'm sure we'll achieve that in the future.
Okay. The other area where your critics say that he has failed to be an effective Chief Minister is they point towards tourism. They say Orissa, perhaps more than any other Indian state, is a natural tourist attraction, but he's done nothing to develop tourism compared to states like Kerala, which have done so much more.
Well, let me tell you something about tourism, now that we're on the subject. We've just done a great deal of work, and will do more, on wonderful tourist routes in our state, from the Applique Center of Peepli to the Sun Temple of Konark, along the beach to the holy city of Puri, and from there to the eco-wonder of Lake Chilka.
That's your wish list. The reality is that when you came to power in 98, 99, Orissa had 35,000 foreign tourists a year. In 2003, it's fallen to 23.
But if you allow me to tell you about tourism, these tourist roads are being done, and done very well. Also, we hope very soon to extend our airstrip at Bhubaneswar Airport so that wide-bodied aircraft can come with a large number of tourists. We have wonderful...
Can I interrupt and ask a simple question?
If you'd
You
allow-
say you're doing so much. How much do you spend a year on tourism?
Well, listen, what we are doing is giving the infrastructure for tourism. It's private people who have to come and invest in tourism, so we're giving the infrastructure.
But I'm asking you because do you know what you spend? You spend 6 crore a year. A comparative state in size and in terms of tourism potential is Kerala. They spend 120 crore.
Well, what I'm talking about roads doesn't come in that 6 crore budget. When you talk about infrastructure and you're giving beautiful roads to all the tourist spots, to many of the tourist spots, very important, very famous, very beautiful tourist places. Indeed, to our Buddhist ruins, we are doing remarkable roads there. We are setting up an international peace park.
And you get 23,000 tourists a year, 12,000 less than you were getting in the 90s. In domestic terms, you get 34 lakh tourists a year, just a little more than half of what Kerala gets. Why are you unable to compete with states like Kerala?
Well, just to speak a little more about that, we had the super cyclone when our government came in. That doesn't encourage tourism very much to start with, but we are building up the infrastructure. We've done a great deal for a very beautiful state like Odisha to build the infrastructure.
Do you think you've done enough?
We're going to do a great deal more, but we're certainly...
Do you think you've done enough?
You can't do that much in 4 years.
That sounds as if you're saying, no, you haven't done enough.
Well, we have done a great deal. I have a vision for tourism, and I'm rather glad about that vision, and a great deal will be done and is being done. The Buddhist centers, the wonderful roads there, all that is being done.
You talk of a vision about tourism, and your critics turn around and say that the one difference between him and his predecessors was that Naveen Patnaik understands culture. And yet, they say, he has completely failed to exploit the tourist potential of Orissa's culture.
In the last few years, we've done so much for the restoration of beautiful heritage sites. We're building wonderful roads to craft centers.
Then why don't
great
people come
temples.
to see them?
Indeed they do, and more will come.
But 23,000 foreign tourists, down by almost 50% from what it was when you took over. That doesn't sound as if people are coming.
Well, I've got to speak again about the super cyclone. All those calamities didn't leave a good feeling for a year or so. But now the infrastructure is being built. A lot of it has been done, and we expect to do very well in tourism. I told you about the airstrip we want to increase in Bhubaneswar Airport, which will bring in wide-bodied aircraft, which will bring in large groups of tourists. So that's all on the anvil, and we're working towards that.
So by the time you finish your second term in office, which is 5 years from now, Orissa will be a major tourism destination.
It certainly will.
That is the core of your vision.
It certainly will, because as you know, tourism brings in a great deal of employment and encourages all the arts, the crafts, the handlooms. All that is a part of the tourism boom.
This is a serious commitment, not one that you're going to reverse just as you did the commitment to the Paradip oil refinery.
It was never reversed. We've done all the appropriate tax concessions for the Paradip oil refinery, and Orissa is a treasure trove for tourism.
Okay.
And indeed, we are working towards achieving a great deal of employment and revenue from tourism in a very, very beautiful state.
Chief Minister, I began this interview by talking about what many people consider the wonder of Naveen Patnaik winning elections when 7 years ago he wasn't even in politics. The problem is that this time round you may have won your election in Orissa, but in Delhi, your opponents, the Congress party, head the national government. What sort of relationship will you have with them?
We expect every government, central government, to help a very poor state. We'll always make our very positive demands, and we expect a very positive response.
But how can you ensure that the rivalry that exists in Orissa between your own Biju Janata Dal party and Congress won't lead to bitterness between your state government and Dr. Manmohan Singh's national government?
I'm speaking about realities, economic demands, and Orissa, being a very poor state, will have its demands and requirements. We obviously expect the central government to respond very positively to this.
You're confident of that?
I certainly expect it.
But do you think that your request, which was hanging in the air for 5 years when Mr. Vajpayee was Prime Minister, for special category status, will now be granted to you by your opponents?
I certainly expect the central government to grant it, whoever the central government may be.
But you expected that of Mr. Vajpayee and it never happened. Why should you expect it more realistically of Dr. Manmohan Singh?
Well, let's talk about it historically. Even before I made this demand, other state governments have made it when they've had their governments in power at the center, and they've got no response. We have to keep trying, because Orissa is a poor state, and it requires all the help it can, especially of special category status.
So every time you try and fail, do you get the feeling you're knocking your head against a wall?
In fact, we have improved. In the last few years, as far as education is concerned, as literacy is concerned, we are virtually up to the national
But we're running
average.
out of time. Come back to your demand. Every time you try and fail, do you get the feeling that you're knocking your head against a wall?
I am always optimistic, because one has to always wish the best for a state like Odisha.
In other words, the very condition of the state doesn't allow you opportunity to get depressed.
It's not to do with depression, it's to do a hard day's work properly.
And And that's what you're saying is going to be the solution to getting this special category status. Strive for it, and you hope it will happen.
Indeed.
Can you guarantee that it will happen in the next 5 years?
I certainly hope it will.
Chief Minister, a pleasure having you on Hardtalk India.
Thank you.